This video is sponsored by Card Kingdom. You can visit their store by using my referral link in the description below. Hi everyone, I'm Nitsahone, and today is Friday, and that means it's time for another MTG Top 10, the series where I rank cards based on their historical performance at Magic's highest level of competition. Today, we're going to look at the Ally creature type. I've looked at many creature types over the years, but there's still a ton of significant ones I haven't covered. I ran a poll last week, including allies and a couple of other class creature types, and allies came out on top, so that's what we're looking at today. Allies originally made their debut in Zendikar, where the creature type was largely a stand-in for the idea of having party members that explore this world's dungeons with you. In other words, these people were your allies as you explored the world. Later in the story of the plane, the Eldrazi emerged, and at that point, allies became a creature type that are opposed to the Eldrazi. As a result, almost all allies come from Zendikar's sets, but they have been quite plentiful in them, so there's actually a pretty significant number of allies. To be eligible for this list, a card had to have the ally creature type or be capable of making an ally creature token. In all, there were 107 cards eligible for this list, and in this video, we'll look at the 10 that have left the biggest impact on competitive Magic. Before we get started, here's a quick reminder on how I score cards in these videos. A first tier top 8 is worth 2 points, this includes events like Pro Tours, and a second tier top 8 is worth 1 point, this includes events like regional championships. Alright, let's take a look at the top 10 allies in Magic. At number 10, it is Hada Freeblade. This 1-mana 0/1 gets a +1/+1 counter whenever it or another ally enters the battlefield under your control. Many allies have effects that give you a bonus for having allies, which makes sense. A 1-mana 1/2 isn't the worst starting point, and if you can curve out with allies, the Freeblade can give you a pretty massive return on your 1-mana investment. It saw play in standard ally decks, which were never a huge part of the format, resulting in its relatively low score. At number 9, it is Oath of Gideon. For a while, there was a Planeswalker super team known as the Gatewatch, and they formed in the set called Oath of the Gatewatch, which was set on Zendikar. Lots of Planeswalkers got Oath cards in that and later sets to represent them joining this Planeswalker Justice League, and they're all enchantments. This one costs 3 mana and makes 2 1/1 allies when it enters the battlefield. Like other Oaths, it also does something to benefit your Planeswalkers. In this case, Oath of Gideon has your Planeswalkers enter with an additional loyalty counter. That's a nice upgrade, especially because the Oath actually adds to the board at the same time. While in Standard, Oath of Gideon was played in Selesnya tokens decks. The Oath was a great fit there because it made tokens, and it also supported token-making Planeswalkers that were used in the deck, like Nissa Voice of Zendikar. It hasn't gained any points since rotating out of Standard. At number 8, it is Drana, Liberator of Malakir. Drana is a 3-mana 2/3 with flying and first strike, and when she does combat damage to a player, she puts a +1/+1 counter on each attacking creature you control. Because she has first strike, this usually means she will buff your other attacking creatures in time for them to have the stats boost when normal combat damage is dealt. She was played in some Mardu and Abzan aggro decks while she was in Standard, as well as in Golgari Winding Constrictor decks, which were all about +1/+1 counters. Those two cards together could really buff your board. More recently, she's found some success in Pioneer Mono Black aggro, but she doesn't have any points since 2020. At number 7, it is Expedition Envoy. This is a vanilla 1-mana 2/1. For most of Magic's history, a vanilla 1-mana 2/1 or even a 1-mana 2/1 with a downside was something that would see at least some play in standard aggro decks. These days, we usually get some upside attached to our 1-mana 2/1s, but that wasn't super common even as recently as 2015. Back then, the Envoy was good enough to see play as a 1-drop in mono-white aggro decks that didn't even care about the Envoy's creature type. It hasn't gained any points since rotating out of Standard. At number 6, it is Lantern Scout. This 3-mana 3/2 comes with Rally, the Battle for Zendikar ally mechanic, which means you get an effect when it or another ally enters the battlefield under your control. In the case of the Scout, your whole board gets lifelink. Giving lifelink to your creatures even once is often enough to help you win a race, so the fact that the Scout can keep it going if you play more allies is pretty great. It was largely a sideboard card while it was in Standard, showing up in aggro deck sideboards to bring in the mirror. It also has a single point each in Modern and Pioneer, where it served in similar roles in Humans and Winota decks respectively. Lantern Scout doesn't have any points since 2021. At number 5, it is Tuk Tuk Scrapper. This 4-mana 2/2 destroys an artifact when it or another ally enters the battlefield under your control, and you get to do damage equal to that artifact's mana value to its controller. That's a fairly strong effect against artifact-heavy decks, especially those reliant on expensive artifacts. It didn't see much play in Standard, but it has been played a significant amount in Legacy sideboards over the years, where it's shown up in Goblin and Dragon Stompy. Over the years, Legacy has prominently featured many artifacts. It can be particularly nice to destroy something like Batterskull with the Scrapper, since that card is a huge problem for those types of decks thanks to its lifelink. It doesn't have any points though since 2019, with Goblin Trashmaster now usually filling a similar role in Legacy's Goblin decks. At number 4, it is Reckless Bushwacker. This 3-mana 2/1 comes with haste, and it also has Surge, which means you can pay 1 generic and a red for it instead if you have already cast a spell that turn. And you really want to do it that way because when you do, the Bushwacker gives +1/+0 and haste to all of your creatures. If you already cast another creature that turn, that can be particularly nice and result in a ton of damage out of nowhere. It saw some play in red aggro decks while it was in Standard. It's also gained some points in Modern, including in the humorously named 8-Whack deck, a Goblin deck that features both Reckless Bushwacker and Goblin Bushwacker, giving the deck access to another effect that is great when you have a bunch of creatures. It has had the most consistent success, though, in Pioneer, where it has been prominently featured in that format's cruel aggro decks. It's likely to gain more points in Pioneer in the future, and Modern isn't entirely out of the question either. At number 3, it is Zulaport Cutthroat. This 2-mana 1/1 drains your opponent 1 life anytime a creature you control dies. Obviously, that means the Cutthroat is a great fit in any deck that likes to sacrifice creatures, as it can rapidly do a ton of damage to your opponent, especially if you have multiples in play, so it should come as no surprise that the Cutthroat has been played in exactly those kinds of decks in multiple formats. In Standard, it was played alongside Nantuko Husk and Rally the Ancestor decks. These decks look to sacrifice a bunch of creatures to the Husk with at least 1 Cutthroat in play, and after you sacrifice everything, you can cast Rally, get them all back, and do it again. This deck was great at quickly going wide with sacrifice fodder, so it was pretty easy for the deck to pull it off. In Pioneer, it's been played in sacrifice decks, especially those that are built around Bolas's Citadel. The Citadel can allow you to rip through your deck by paying life, and the Cutthroat's ability to gain you life can help keep the train going. The deck can even eventually win the game with the Citadel's ability and a Cutthroat in play, and it also has many other sacrifice outlets that allow the Cutthroat to do a ton of work. In Modern, it's played in Yawgmoth combo decks, which look to sacrifice 2 creatures with Undying repeatedly by getting rid of their +1/+1 counters with Yawgmoth's ability to put -1/-1 counters on them. With the Cutthroat in play, this means you can win the game with the combo. The Cutthroat is fairly well positioned to gain more points in Modern and Pioneer in the future. At number 2, it is Sylvan Advocate. This 2-mana 2/3 comes with Vigilance, and in the later game, it can feel a heck of a lot like Tarmogoyf since it becomes a 2-mana 4/5. Once you have enough lands, it also buffs your creature lands if you have those lying around. The Advocate would likely have seen play in any Standard format, but it got an extra boost out of the fact that when it was a 4/5, it could survive one of the main board sweepers in the format, Languish. There weren't any other 2-drops that could make a claim like that. The efficiency of the Advocate virtually made it a staple for green decks, and this was true in control, mid-range, and aggro builds. Control decks could play it alongside their Languishes without being worried they would lose it, and the other decks could play it purely based on its efficiency and its ability to survive Languish. Just to name a few of the decks it was featured in, there was Collected Company, Green-White Token, Sultai Control, Gruul Ramp, and Golgari Constrictor. The Advocate hasn't gained a single point since rotating out of Standard, but it was such a fixture in that Standard format that it's going to be a long time before something like Zulaport Cutthroat or Reckless Bushwacker can catch it. At number 1, it is Gideon Ally of Zendikar. Gideon has the word ally all over it. Not only is it in the card's name, but when this version of Gideon becomes an indestructible, undamageable creature with his +1, he has the ally creature type, and he has a 0 loyalty ability that makes a 2/2 ally token. He also comes with a -4 that gives you an emblem that buffs your whole board. Gideon was utterly dominant during his time in Standard in a way that few cards are. Think of more recent examples like Shieldred or Fable of the Mirror Breaker. Gideon's ability to churn out 2/2 creatures to protect him and pressure your opponent, plus the ability to rumble himself, is quite impressive. He also is interesting in that he has an ultimate you can use the minute you play him, and while it's not a game-breaking ultimate, Sometimes an Anthem for your whole team is what you need right away. His highlights in Standard came in decks like Abzan, Selesnya tokens, and Mardu vehicles. He's picked up top 8s in Modern decks like Abzan, Junk, and Hatebear. He sees play in Legacy's Death and Taxes and Miracles. He even sees play in Vintage Landstill, where if you can stick Gideon ahead of Standstill, he can churn out allies, which will eventually make your opponent have to play a spell. He isn't rapidly gaining points these days, but he is gaining points periodically in pretty much every format he's legal in, so it's unlikely he ever loses his commanding spot at the top of this list. So those are the top 10 allies in Magic. If you're looking for some powerful allies, check out the description where you can find a direct Card Kingdom link for each card that appeared in the video. If you enjoyed this video, please like it and share it so that others can enjoy it too. If you want to make sure you stay aware of future videos, don't forget to subscribe, and if you want to catch up on past videos, including many more that look at creature types, you should see some playlists on your screen shortly. Lastly, if you want to go the extra mile in supporting me and the channel, you can do that by becoming a patron or a channel member. You can find ways to do both of those things in the description. Thanks for watching.